My guest today on the A-Game podcast is a professional fighter since 1998. He is a pure martial artist. He's an actor, a commentator, an entrepreneur and investor based out of Chicago. He's lived in Miami, LA, New York, and traveled the entire world. He's done commentating for Fight Pass, for Shoot On Fight Pass, Bellator, ONE FC, and is also an actor who's been on Days of Our Lives, CSI, As the World Turns. He's coming out with a new movie soon called Ask Me to Dance, which should be released shortly. And he's probably best known as the co-host of Human Weapon on the History Channel. He's the host of the outstanding podcast, the Jason Chambers Podcast, and also slightly was named one of the most eligible bachelors in America by Extra. So we call you the Mario Lopez of Jiu-Jitsu because you don't seem to age, dude. I was watching the episodes the other day. You still got great head of hair on you. You're looking young as ever.
Thanks.
Board of Directors for a Cancer Research Institute known as the City of Hope, a national medical center. He's a former contestant on Fear Factor, founder of Apex Sports Agency, former pro fighter with 10 submissions, 5 knockouts, and also most impressive, a brown belt under Eddie Bravo and a black belt under the amazing Renzo Gracie. Welcome to the A-Game podcast, Jason Chambers.
Man, that's a mouthful. Holy shit. Think how we didn't have to do that more than once.
You got a lot of stuff on there, man. You cover a ton of bases, dude.
Yeah, it's great. You know, I get to wear like the jack of all trades, master of none t-shirt everywhere. So I'm just still trying to find the niche. See, on paper, it looks good. Like, oh, you have so many diversified interests. Like, I just can't find what I'm good at yet. That's the problem. Hopefully it's a podcast.
It's interesting that you say that because your podcast specifically is very similar to mine. We've had a lot of the same guests on and stuff, but I hear people talk a lot about how, like, I'll get people on and they'll do the podcast and say, hey, you know what? You're too broad. You need to really niche down and find something. You can't have a real estate guy and then a jiu-jitsu guy and then a this guy and that guy. But, you know, you do, and it works and it's great. And I'd love to hear more about that because exactly like you just said, you feel like you're a jack of all trades, but a master of none. But you have a black belt in martial arts. You have a black belt in other things. I'm sure you're earning it physically and metaphorically and all these other things. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how the podcast came about while we're talking about that, because I love what you're doing there. To me, that I'm trying to do the same thing, and I think it worked great.
Yeah, I mean, you hit on a good topic, and it's something that I've struggled with too, is that from a marketing perspective, and here I'm reading another book right now I read all the time. This is a perennial seller, another wonderful book on marketing. I suggest you pick it up too. It's about making like marketing and stuff that lasts. And, you know, obviously everyone talks about being niche and being hyper niche. And that was something I struggled with because my interests are pretty broad. You know, I love cryptocurrency. I love jiu-jitsu. I love fighting. I love aliens. I love conspiracy theories. I mean, so I have a lot of, you know, kind of similar like authors. Like I just had my favorite author, Ben Mesrich, on. So like we've been kind of all over the place. And that's one of the things. And I got a comment early on because when we first did the first crypto podcast, someone was like, stay in your lane. And I was like, oh, that kind of hurts. That hurts. And, you know, I did some research, and you know what? I heard a very poignant interview with a guy that's a really well-known podcaster, and his name eludes me. But he said, you know what, the way that I make my podcast is I don't focus on a niche. I think of it as a museum, right? Like you walk into a museum and every painting doesn't have to be for you. But maybe you walk in there and you go, oh, look, that sparked my interest. Or you took away something from there that was some value, you know, like, which I'm like, that makes a lot of sense. So I think my podcast is, at the end of the day, the reason I'm doing it is because I want to talk to people that I find interesting and compelling, whether they have great stories, whether it's a perseverance story, whether it's some business tips that can help people to make money, whether it's sports, or something that I find compelling. And, you know, I don't want to limit that to just being jiu-jitsu or just being MMA because first of all, there's just a limited scope, but, you know, like I think that, you know, just being able to have great people on that have really good stories to tell. And we have some episodes that we've taped that we haven't aired because I'm like, oh, that was fucking horrible. I can't, like, this is painful. I'm talking to guys. I'm like, I don't know what I want to talk to you about. And that's a bad sign because, you know, if the more excited I am to talk to someone, the more excited you are, not only does it translate, but it also like there's a difference. If you watch my Ben Mesrich podcast, which is coming out, I think on Tuesday or Thursday, like I was super excited for Ben. Like I made a bunch of notes and all this stuff and I was like, woo, and I was jazzed the whole time. So I was like a little kid. Then I have guys with like my producer kind of forced on me, like, you got to talk to this guy. It's interesting because of this. I'm just sitting there like, oh, why are you here? What are you doing? So, but it's challenging. So that's the reason this kind of came about is this wasn't sporadic. I mean, I've been friends with Rogan for a long time, and we don't catch up as much because he's been so freaking busy now. But I remember before he did his first podcast, he was doing video blogs with Brian Redman. And the very first podcast that they did, I remember watching that, and he sent, and then, like hanging out with Eddie and Joe and everybody, and like he sent Joey Diaz a mic. I think he sent Eddie Bravo a mic, and they had no idea what the fuck the podcasting was. There was like, I forget even the streaming. It was like Streamio. It was some weird streaming platform. It wasn't even on YouTube really. It was like some weird podcast streaming thing, and I remember watching that, and I'm just like, who the fuck is gonna watch this? Like, who's gonna? Evidently, the answer is everybody. So, I think that it's easy to get discouraged when you do this stuff because there's just such a bunch of noise out there, right? There's so many people that are doing podcasts, and not only that, but you have to think about like how do you SEO title these, and who are the guests, and how long should they be, and where are we on all these different channels? Excuse me. And so for a long time, like I wanted to do a podcast, and I actually put the cart before the horse and like built out these really cool podcast rooms and all this setup, and we couldn't get the functionality of like getting the syncing and back and forth and bringing people in. And this was 7 years ago, and then we tried again like 4 years later, and I was just really frustrated. And then it just haphazardly happened that a buddy of mine who does headshots, Chris Headshots, when you think headshots, think Chris Headshots. He's going to appreciate that. He does, he is part of his like, repertoire as he started getting into podcasting, and we did a few episodes just kind of like to see how it felt, and now it's become like a full-time 4 of us working on this thing, and we're committed to it for a bare minimum of a year, and we're trying to build it, and so far we just hit 1,000 subs on YouTube, but pretty quickly in like 2 months, so it's growing, man, but it's a grind.
That's awesome, man. It's interesting because you talked about the SEO and all the other stuff that goes into it, and obviously the 2 responses I get from most people when I try and battle them on exactly what we just talked about, they go, you know what, you're trying to be Joe Rogan. You can't be Joe Rogan. He can do that. I'm like, all right, whatever. It's not really where I don't assume I'm going to like have this crazy Spotify deal. But I also hear people talk about like you have to get their attention. And for me, one of the things that kept me on your podcast that I think is super smart is the fact that if I listen to a real estate podcast and it's just hours and hours of real estate guys talking real estate stuff, at some point I'm going to say, all right, it's been 3 hours of that. I need to switch mentally. Let me go listen to something on crypto. Let me go listen to a guy just talk about jujitsu. And yours kept turning the tides right at the right time. So I was able to get a little bit of everything I enjoy, but in like pieces that it kept my interest. So in a time where everybody's fighting and the attention span shorter than ever with TikTok reels and things like that, I think it actually makes more sense than niching down to be able to keep your audience, because especially with what you and I are doing, almost every business guy that I talk to wants to hear and learn about fighters, and almost every fighter that I talk to want to know about investing in crypto and real estate and ways to make money. So I feel like they do sync very well into each other.
Yeah, well, you hit on a good point. Like, I mean, I tongue in cheek have said like this is like the joke. When people ask me, like, well, what's your podcast like? Because I mean, some of the guests that I've gotten on were probably above the pay grade for having nobody else on yet, and got some really good people lined up. And I'm like, it's like Joe Rogan's podcast in terms of format, without the 120 million from Spotify. So, so like in terms of that, but yeah, and I think it's an unfair comparison because it's not like we're trying to be the next Joe Rogan. But if you look at like David Letterman, The Late Show, The Tonight Show, there's a the systematic, what makes people different is the conversation that you're going to have with me is different than the conversation that Vinny's going to have with me. So like that's not necessarily trying to be Joe Rogan. It's just trying to, I mean, for me, I just happen to have, because Joe's a good friend of mine, like a lot of the similar interests. We both fucking love fighting. I met Joe doing Fear Factor, and then became friends with him through the jiu-jitsu community, through Eddie Bravo and stuff, and then became really good friends with him and hung out with him a bunch at the Comedy Store and watched his podcast blow up. And that's very inspiring. I think that one of the bigger things, I don't know if you read Gary Vee at all, Gary Vaynerchuk, but one of the things that I found to be very prolific was just to stop worrying about what everybody else thinks. You just got to be authentic, because what I noticed too, and I do this a lot, and I'm a big business and SEO and marketing guy, and I love, like I have so many, like my hands in so many areas. And what I've found is that you just have to kind of just fucking suck it up and do it. I mean, Gary Vee, who everyone knows now, he said he put out thousands of pieces of content before anyone ever heard anything. And not to be redundant if you know the story, but so he started doing wine, and he went on when he started to do his family's wine business, and anyone that tweeted about wine, anybody, he responded to for 10 hours a day, for 7 days a week, for years, and then he started to build some traction that way. There's John Anik I just had on the show. He said he sent out 300 demo tapes. 300 demo tapes, and before he got a little bite from ESPN while he was smoking weed on his couch. And that's the same thing, we hear these overnight successes that are it's just a battle of, like, I truly believe that perseverance overcomes talent. I think I have very little talent and a lot of perseverance. So hopefully that holds true.
No, I agree with that. John Addict's a great example of the same thing I was going to say about you is when you talked about SEO and all these things. When I started doing the podcast, I didn't even know about mics or any of that stuff. And then you start to learn stuff, and then you can't really unsee them. So stuff like, even I used to just post something on YouTube. Now I'm like, no, there's SEO titles and there's things, and it all makes sense. So there's so much that goes into it, which is why I think a lot of people think they're just going to record something and all these people are going to listen to it. But because you came from an analyst and a commentator background, how much did that help you to realize the importance of being prepared for your guests and really having that professional side of interviewing people? Because it was a very big learning curve for me, which I didn't even realize until I started. The more I talk to people, I'm amazed now when they come on and there's just no preparation or no anything for when they're interviewing these guests. Like you said, even ones that are out of their pay grade, it's like, this person came on and talked to you. You don't even know how to pronounce their name. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, no, it's crazy. I think that I've been lucky in a large capacity because the two loves of my life were always stage and cage. I mean, even when I had my first fight in 1998, and I was still doing like theater, and like I went to New York just so I could study acting, and then I was did like conservatory programs. I was training at Henzo's, and the way that I kind of made ends meet instead of getting like regular jobs was like taking fights. So I think I've kind of always grown in this, like, the outgoing personality, hosting space. The commentary stuff does make you do a lot of homework. I think that, like, it's easy to get lazy, and sometimes it's even easier for me if I know the guest really well and I know is a lot of the background and stuff. I think the challenging part is not asking the questions that everyone else is going to ask. How'd you do this? Why'd you do this? So trying to find the questions, like, what are the most challenging things that you faced with this, or doing, like, digging in a little bit more, because I think that that's probably the most challenging aspect of it. But yeah, like SEO and all that stuff, like, people don't realize, like, no matter what you're doing, whether it's I'm the guy that manufactures this part of the can, or I made the microphones, or I'm hosting a podcast, your job is to be a good marketer. I mean, you have to. I'm a fundamentalist in the fact that if you're a restaurant, the first and foremost thing is you have to have good food. And the second thing is you have to be able to, like, let people know about that. And that can happen two ways, right? It can happen organically, grassroots, which is what most people do. We just put out a bunch of content, we just put our heads down, we just keep doing it. And the other side of it is you focus the extra few hours a day on, the marketing side of it, and SEO and titles, and, like, like, I've had to do, like, a whole deep dig into, like, how do we word these? How do we, what do we say? How do we get, like, without making it clickbait, but also, like, so that someone feels like, what's the value in me clicking on this? Like, why? Like, right now, like, if you title this Jason Chambers interview, only people that are going to watch this are people that really give a shit about my interview. But if we talked about, like, like, strategies for success in marketing and business, that's probably going to birth to a wider audience, right? So I think that, like, those things have been kind of the challenge for me.
No, I think that's great, man. And you do a great job with that. Even some of the things where, obviously I've talked to Matt every week for the last, like, 15 years, and I still listen to it. And it was like, should you be wearing a gi? And I'm like, I'd love to hear him talk. I've heard him talk about this, but I always want to hear, like, where the conversation goes. So I think taking some of those key points and, like, dissecting them from it keeps it attractive, because, again, I was clicking through, man, and saving all your episodes. I got to listen to this one. I got to listen to this one. So you're doing it really well. And one of the things I heard you say that applies, I guess, to business and jiu-jitsu, and we'll talk about investing as well, but you were talking to, I think it was one of the black belts from Eddie Bravo's that you were talking with, and saying how, the difference was a guy like Hoyler really is the top dog at his gym, and he doesn't seem to really be going and learning, like, the new things that, like, the white belts are doing, or the new moves that are being reinvented. Whereas Eddie Bravo, although he's the top dog, he's out learning what the new guys are doing, and he's always trying to expand his arsenal. And that's why his thing is just growing and blowing up. And I feel like talking to all these different guys in jiu-jitsu, in MMA, in business, in crypto, is sort of what you're doing in that aspect, that you're getting guys on and hearing what they're doing, and hearing, like, the new thing here or the new thing there, and really expanding your arsenal to all levels. And I'm interested to see, for you now running a podcast, has that helped really expand and help your mind and your aspirations grow in business and in life, for just the different guests and things to really again, like expand and learn new things when you thought you had, you learned it all, and it peels out this onion of all these different levels and tree branches and things you can go down.
Yeah, so I think I have an insatiable appetite to learn new things. I think that like a lot of times like, we put these like placeholders in our head. Like I've got vacations coming up, and a lot of the time it's the anticipation for the thing is more important than the thing itself. And it's like it's looking forward to those things. And I know that when I have someone on the show that I'm going to learn something from. I mean, my biggest struggle is I argue with like my producer occasionally. He wants to put people on the show, and I'm like, if I don't care, I just don't want to sit down and talk to someone. If I don't have a genuine interest in what they're talking about, otherwise it becomes like a paid advertisement spot for someone's like like their thing. And so yeah, I think that's probably the biggest takeaway for me is like that I selfishly want to learn more about these things. Like I like hearing the jiu-jitsu stories. I like hearing things like that. And you brought up a point about Eddie, and one of the things I do appreciate about Eddie is that he does learn from his students. And I think, oh boy, what's his name? Jigoro Kano. I think the guy that invented judo. I'm butchering his name, but the guy that basically was the forefather of judo. He wanted to be buried with his white belt because he wanted to be remembered as a student. And I think that's really important in life, is that we constantly go forward with that, like, every man is my teacher in some area, And I think that it's easy to get. I know I've gotten in that fucking that headspace all the time. That I feel like I know better than people on certain aspects, and I have to like check my ego because it's usually in those spots where you learn the most.
I love that, man. You touched on a really interesting thing, and apparently a mutual friend of ours that I didn't know until this morning, Mark Turner. He owns a BJJ lab in Naperville, old Chicago
Mark
guy
Turner,
used to run around.
I'm sure that I know him to see him, man. I've lots of people choking me.
Scottish guy, beard, black belt. He's ranked number 10 right now in IBJJF, but he runs a BJJ lab in Naperville out here in Chicago under Damian Maya. And every now and then they have like an open mat day, and what he'll do is he'll like literally have everybody that's on the mat show a move from black belt to white belt. And it's interesting sometimes because I mean, a lot of the times they're going to show some goofy stuff, but every now and then the white belt will just show something that they saw on YouTube or some weird thing. And it's like, you know what, that's actually not too bad. And I think having that open mind is where everything expands. If everybody was closed-minded, there wouldn't be this growth. And, again, I've heard you say it, the athletes of 20 years ago versus the athletes of 20 years today, it all comes from the expansion and the growth and all those type of things. So I think it's really important. I think podcasts and good hosts who have that variety of guests really are helping pave the way for that growth.
Yeah. Why did you get into podcasting?
Initially I was traveling all over the country for like real estate stuff. And I loved it because I was also training jiu-jitsu all over the country with different guys. And I realized that a lot of the people that I wanted to touch base with, it was always, I'll call them next week. I'll call them a few weeks from now. And it just wasn't happening. And one of my good friends is Billy Grassy from Biohazard. And he was talking to Jamie Josta on a podcast about how they used to see each other all the time when they were on touring and they were in their younger days. And then as they all got older, they really weren't able to connect because like when one guy's in the city, the other guy's on tour, he's with his kids. And he had said that Jamie Josta started doing the podcast and he had recently spoken to the drummer of Pantera. And he was like, he passed away, but thank God I have this podcast because I get to spend uninterrupted hours with him a few times a year and catch up with all the people in my life. And if nobody listens, who cares? Like, it's just an excuse for me to basically connect with my buddies that I wouldn't have anyway. And I liked that. And that kind of made me push to say, you know what, let me learn a little bit more about some of the people in my life and use that as an excuse. And after the first few minutes, I just loved it because it's, again, guys at Serra's or Longo's or people that you see and you talk to them in between rounds. But when you get this and it's just no interruptions for an hour, people I've known for 15 years, I learned more about in an hour and have a stronger bond and a stronger connection with them than I probably ever would have. So just kind of grew from there. But that was the initial thing, was like, let me just start doing it to keep in contact with people and see what they're about.
So you're in Chicago now, or in the suburb, Naperville?
Yeah, I'm outside of Naperville, and then I spend my time between Long Island and Chicago suburbs.
Okay, how old are you?
41.
So we're the same age. We're 41. Yeah. So you remember, you ever remember a place whenever I hear the word Naperville, there's a childhood memory of this place called Zero Gravity. That was like this teeny bopper club. Do you remember a place called Zero Gravity? It was like, you could be 14 to get in, and like, it was like 14, like 22. It was like this super popular high school club back in Naperville. But so are you a Bears fan as well?
No, man, I've only been out in the Illinois area for a few years now. So I'm really like kind of born and raised in New York guy.
Giants or Jets?
Giants.
I guess Giants or Jets, either one's. You're in the same spot that I am with the Bears. It's just every next season's our perennial season. Nice,
man. So, moving on to some of the other stuff you were talking about, I like what you were going into with business stuff, and you're talking about how you have an insatiable appetite to learn. And I think that that's interesting because one of the things you did say that I think every entrepreneur struggles with is you have a lot of FOMO of like, hey, you know what, I might miss out on this, but I have to have the discipline to say no to certain things and just accept the fact that I'm going to maybe miss some opportunities, but at the end of the day, I am staying focused on what the goals are. And I think that that's a struggle for everybody at some point is, again, you listen to the podcast and you go, do I want to do NFTs? Do I want to do crypto? Do I want to do real estate? Do I want to get into jiu-jitsu? So how do you really weigh out your decision making for deciding this is a lane or something I'm going to give attention and focus to versus this is something I'm going to pass on? Because that could be something that's a detriment for paralysis by analysis just for overwhelming options.
Yeah, well, I think that where your mind goes and drifts to when you have free time is kind of like your conscious and subconscious telling you like what to focus on. At least for me it is. So, you know, I've always just been involved in like, I love the crypto space and I love the jiu-jitsu space, and you have to be obsessed about it. I think that that's like the if there's a fundamental core value that I see between like the Amazon, the Jeff Bezoses, and like these guys aren't working 40 hours a week, especially in the beginning. They're working 80, 90 hours a week, and they're obsessed with it, and it all comes at a cost. I'm reading a book down to Atomic Habits, another great book, and it talks about like, you know, like there is that cost, right? Like I want to get in shape at the cost of eating that yummy donut in front of me. You know, it's like I want to go to the gym at cost of spending time with my family. So it's like we have these like scales, right? On one hand, we put this is the thing we want. On the other hand, it's like, well, this is what it costs us. And a lot of times we can pretend and we can fool ourselves so easily. Oh, yeah, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm going to do this. And you really like clock your hours and you're like, man, I've worked 4 hours a day on this. Not, you know, like you've been working 14 hours a day, you know, put more effort in, double down on what's working and pivot. And I think that like, you know, as we're growing in the podcast, we're you know figuring out. I'm a big systems nerd. Like I believe so much in like replicatable systems, make things simple. Like McDonald's is run by geriatrics and high school kids. And the reason they're so successful isn't because they have Harvard MBAs behind the counter. It's because they have the system in place that they can rinse, wash, and repeat, and push somebody else into it. And if somebody else leaves, so kind of forging and pioneering what those systems are for our podcast has been a little challenging. But it's also helping like just like in business, like whatever was working, double down on that, and what's not, you can pivot. So we're either doing good or we're learning. So yeah.
That's awesome, man. You know, on your episodes with Charlie Shrem and I think Ronnie Moaz, I don't know.
Yeah, Moaz. Yeah,
right.
You did.
Great episodes, man. And I thought it was a lot of really cool takeaways there that I thought the stance on Bitcoin. And one of the things that he said on it that really stuck out was, you know, he's like, hey, it's been like what, 10, 13 years of this out there. He's like, people forget that it took that long for people to be all in on checks. Like, no, oh, I'm not going to take a check. And so when you start to think about like the processes from decades before of all these things that are considered mainstream and normal today, that there was so much resistance on that change initially. And then you look at like what Bitcoin is, the difference on how fast that's going, and his 400K plus evaluation today. You had a strategy on your buy and hold. I think you were calling it the 80-20-30 rule. I'd love to hear you talk a little bit more about that and what your specific strategy is for Bitcoin investing or for just crypto investing.
Well, so just to touch base on like the initial thing. I mean, if you look at the internet, right? I think that's kind of the biggest parallel is the internet's adoption to now. You look back and there's like Katie Couric talking on, I forget what is it, Today Show or something, and she's talking to a producer and what's this internet? What is the internet? And it's funny to hear that now because who doesn't use the internet? Like who doesn't? I don't have a home cell. I mean, like who has a home phone line anymore? Like it's like everyone's got a cell phone. We're technological nerds. And I think that the bigger the wheel is, the harder it is and the slower it is for it to turn, right? So like when you're talking about something like Bitcoin, which is a disruptor in terms of gold and global economic scale, there's going to be a lot of friction into that turning wheel because it changes everything. The international monetary policies, the big banks, the world banks, and they don't want to slow innovation down, but I think they kind of do on some levels. And they just want to be able to kind of harness it. So I think that's one of the challenges that we have in the crypto space is a lack of regulation and things like that. But like if you look at the internet in 1997, we have the same amount of users today in the crypto space that the internet did in 1997, and we're growing 4 times faster. So to think that technology is exponential and it always builds on each other and it moves forward. So it's not like we're going to invent the digital television and then suddenly we're going to go, let's go back to the analog TV, right? Or like we're going to invent a cell phone and then we're going to get, you know, we move forward. And I think that this has been a pivotal over the last 18 months time for Bitcoin. as we've seen, and we're still waiting for the SEC to approve a spot Bitcoin ETF so people can invest in and they actually own the underlying asset. But we're seeing people kind of acknowledge okay, Bitcoin's a real thing. It's no longer this thing that it's not. It's a new emerging asset class. And like any new emerging asset class, it's going to go through its growing pains. That's why we see these huge pullbacks and stuff. And a big part of that, the volatility in Bitcoin is heavily predicated on overly leveraged margin trading. So whereas people are going in and they're doing 10 to, some of these sites are doing 100x leverage, which is fucking insane. And you get $500,000 in there, you've suddenly got $50 million worth of leverage to float around. You're a $10 million whale and you've got 100 million or whatever it is. 1 million would be 100 million. So that's why you see all these shorts and longs getting liquidated, and we have all this crazy up and down. But if you zoom back and you look at the whole big picture, Bitcoin's been the best performing asset since its inception in 2009, and bar none. And the returns, they diminish year after year, but they're still beating everything by a large margin. So to get into my investing strategy, I think that people are always I talk about crypto since 2016, and then they get into crypto, and then they call me up as soon as it goes. There's a funny line in I think it's Wolf of Wall Street where he's like, "Don't pitch the bitch." He's like, it's like if it goes down, they're gonna call you once a week, and if God forbid it goes up, they're gonna call you every fucking day. And I'm like, that's kind of I'm butchering the line, but there's something in there like that, and it's very similar because the friends that I've got into crypto, they see it go up, and they're like, you're a genius, and then as soon as there's a pullback, I sold all my crypto. Why do you sell on the way down? It doesn't make any sense. So what I've said is that look, figure out what the two things that I think everybody wants to do is they want to buy low, sell high, right? And then they want to figure out what's a safe amount they can put in, because I've over leveraged myself into crypto where I'm like, oh no, I needed that money to pay bills. Shit. Then you're forced to sell with the market, and it's not a sustainable. You become a swing trader. I don't want to be a swing trader. So what I did was I said, look, figure out a way to commit X number of dollars to your crypto portfolio in the macro sense. So let's say that's $100 a month. Let's just make it easy. $100 a month into crypto. Out of that $100 a month that you're going to do into crypto, automatically 80, 20, 30. 80% goes into your crypto portfolio, however you allocate that, Bitcoin, altcoins, whatever. 20% goes to the side every month. So that's money that's just saving. And you're waiting for a 30% market pullback so that you can then use those additional funds to buy the dip. So you're getting kind of best of the both worlds. Not these 10% dips, but the 30% dips, which usually will happen over, course of a week or two. You see, hey, it was at all-time high and now it's down 30%. There's a lot of good value there. If an asset was $3,000 and now it's selling on sale for $2,000, that's on sale in terms of my perspective, and it hedges risk a little bit. That's not financial advice. I'm not a financial planner. Don't sue me if somebody loses their shirt and says Chambers told me to fucking do this. So.
No, that's great, man. And I think a couple of things that you touched on there that are true is, I'm going to butcher the line too, but if on one of your podcasts, they were saying hey, if you're not prepared to hold on to an asset for 10 years, you shouldn't be investing in it for 10 minutes, or something along those lines. And I think in real estate and in crypto, it's helped me a lot, because if I would have freaked out and sold it when Bitcoin first tanked, or some of these properties, the value started getting sketchy, you look at now, and almost anybody that I talked to, I was just talking to Chris Weidman about this, and we were like, I don't think anybody that has sold anything in the last few years now is happy that they did it. They're all like, man, if I would have just held on, look where it would have been today.
Yeah.
So I think some of that discipline of being able to navigate those murky waters when things get tough and not act emotionally to ditch it is a huge, huge component of being able to be a savvy and an investor that has longevity. And I feel like that's why it translates so well when black belts and guys like you and Chris Weidman and Ali Akinta and all these guys that I talk to go over into the investing space, because they don't make these crazy, irrational, emotional decisions when things get stressful, because they know what real stress is like when there's a guy on top of them, punching their face in front of a million people on TV, how to kind of take a breath and find a way out and make a cool, calm, collected situation. So my question for you would be very similar of, how much of your background in martial arts and knowing how to navigate stressful situations do you think has helped you make good, logical business decisions?
Well, I think that there's certain attributes that have carried over from martial arts. I think that for you to fight, at the UFC level, that there's, to get to that point where someone finally says, oh, I know this guy now because he's fighting in the UFC. You've spent so much blood, sweat, and tears in dedication and passion that have come at such a cost of other aspects of your life. So to have the fortitude and dedication and to do something like that, I think those parallel over into other aspects. So it's like when you're, everybody can, oh, I want to try to be a golfer is a lot different than I'm going to be a professional golfer in the PGA. You're committing to a certain number of hours, and what you're eating and sleeping, breathing, reading, who you're hanging out with. You're inundating yourself with roads to be successful in that avenue. So I think that, like, from a martial arts perspective, it has helped me be more focused on things. So like I got into sales when I was like 18 years old at Bally's because I was needed a job, and I was, as a personal trainer, I was doing martial arts at the time, and that started kind of my foray with like sales and just knowing like I was a gregarious kid and I could talk to people. So I started reading a bunch of like Zig Ziglar books and Tony Robbins, and I really got into sales and did really well. So like that kind of started me down the path of reading books on like business and things like that, and kind of go from there. At one point at Apex, my joke was, this was like 5 years ago, and I had that was my main focus, was people go, where'd you go to college? And I said, I didn't go to college, but everyone that works for me did, so it works out. It kind of balances. I think it's I think that it just, guys like Chris Weidman and stuff. I mean, I think that the reason people panic sell is that they do what they're over leveraged, and it's a lack of knowledge. The reason I first got into crypto was because, I mean, like I've always been like, I've always been kind of have a hustle mentality. And when I first watched, I don't know what Bitcoin documentary it was, or I'd watched it. I was actually, before I pulled the trigger, I was into crypto in 2016, but didn't really get into it more until like 2017. I was at I was talking to somebody at the Conor McGregor, Mayweather fight, and it's a buddy of mine who sold his digital company for like $100 million to Travelocity or something back in the day, and he's been in that space. And I was like, is this 2017? I was like, Bitcoin, Ethereum, like, is it like hype, or like, as I keep hearing about it, I've been looking, and he's like, that's the future. So that kind of started me down the intense rabbit hole. And the more I learned about Bitcoin, the more I realized that the counter arguments to it were really just a lack of due diligence. People really weren't able to make, you can hack it. No, not really. I mean, it's very difficult to hack. Maybe quantum attacks could pose an issue, but that's still yet to be determined. There's no value. Well, I mean, why does gold have a value? I mean, besides, there's some intrinsic use to it, but like for the most part, we give value to things. I mean, salt was the first commodity people traded with. I mean, nobody was like, I had to have all this salt. So I think that the more I got into it, the more I realized, wow, this has massive potential to disrupt a huge industry, which is not just the financial sector, but you're looking now at NFTs, and you look at, the gaming space. I mean, I think we're on the precipice of a massive shift and change in the digital landscape.
I agree with that, man. How do you not get overwhelmed with it, though? I look at these things, and I'm always trying to build my foundations and grow and learn. And then there's all this other stuff, like even on jiu-jitsu, it's like, I feel like I'm doing good with my butterfly sweeps. And then I'm watching these guys do buggy chokes, and then buggy choke escapes. And, the same thing with, real estate and crypto. And I feel like I'm getting a hold on this. And then a guy comes on your podcast or Wyman's podcast, and now it's NFTs. And this other jiu-jitsu guy is telling me I shouldn't buy real estate. I should be investing in sandboxes in the metaverse. And it's like, at one point you're like, where do I focus? How do I not get overwhelmed with the next thing and figure out what to go on? I watch a lot of people do it with Clubhouse. Everybody went all in on Clubhouse, and then it was, so figuring out really where to do that. Are you still taking bits and pieces of what you learn every podcast and trying to implement certain things? Or
for sure, it can be a lot, because like the crypto space has, like, when I first got into crypto space, it was like ICOs were the big thing, and it was like, ICO craze, and then now it's like NFTs, now it's becoming the metaverse, and there's always going to be that new thing, right? So it's tough. I mean, I try to get like compartmentalized knowledge. If you ever read the 4-Hour Work Week, like I try to go on and like I'll watch videos. Like there's a few YouTubers I follow, so I'll try to keep up with like what's going on behind the scenes and stuff like that. But within my own admission, like I'm not nearly as savvy with NFTs and metaverse and sandbox. I mean, like I have been pretty lucky on calling good valuations for stuff that I think are going to do it. but I haven't had the time to get in there and really like pull triggers or do things like that. I mean, and like another aspect is, you know, the MMA fights. You know, I fought for a long time, and I've been involved in the space. I mean, my first fight was in 1997 or 8. My last fight was in 2008. And people are always assuming, because I'm a black belt in jiu-jitsu and I still teach, still just to help out Juan Rodriguez at Henzo Gracie Fort Lauderdale on Tuesdays, and I enjoy teaching. They assume that I'm watching all the UFCs, and I'm like, I can't tell you the last UFC I watched. Maybe 5 in the last 3 years, just because if it's a big fight, there's just too much to keep up with. And that's why I think you really have to figure out what you're passionate about, because there's so much space, right? I mean, we're a digital world. The world's so much more accessible now at our fingertips. So we rapidly become an ADD seeking culture. That's why one of the things, you remember VH1's pop-up videos?
Yeah.
So we started doing that for the podcast now, just to keep it, because I know like the traction as a, you know, analytics, how long someone watches a podcast and stuff like that will be a big determining. Click-through rate's a big deal, and then also how long you're keeping people on your YouTube channel is another big deal. And so we're messing around with now, like trying the pop-up video stats, but that's a fucking ton of work, man, because you know, like we all got to sit there and like make subject lines, and we got to write down, we got to find random facts about, you talked about the word, you said the word Angels baseball, find Angels baseball facts, and then you got to upload them. I mean, it's a lot of work. But that's the reason a lot of people don't do it, is that I think that like in anything in life, the people that are the most successful are the most passionate, period. If you wanted to work at McDonald's and you were the most successful, you were the most passionate McDonald's employee ever. You walk in, you're making your $10 an hour, and you're just like, fucking, I love McDonald's. You learn the corporate culture, you hustle, you show up, you know, like there's a strong case that says, who says you can't be the CEO of McDonald's in 20 years, you know? But it might take 20 years, it might take 60 hours a week. And a lot of people don't want to do that at the cost. They want the result, but they don't want to put in the work effort. And that's, you know, I think that we're inundated with the idea that like, the 4-hour work week and finding our muse and like getting, I love residual and passive income, but the idea that we just set it and forget it, Ron Popeil style, it's not really applicable. I think that you have to go out there and you have to really like, you have to find what you really are passionate about doing. And if you wrote your check, if someone wrote you a check for $1 million a year and said, what is it you want to do now for this $1 million? You have to have a very articulated, this is exactly what I want to do and why I want to do it. It shouldn't be the thing that you want to do. It's got to be the thing you can't not do. And I think there's a big differentiating factor.
I love that, man. I think you kind of just hit on like the essence of like my podcast, continuing that conversation, was I always saw those things for the people that I know that are successful today. Like even like I remember Nick Diaz when Matt beat St. Pierre, and they were like, are you shocked? And Nick Diaz was like, no. He's like, I've known Matt Serra forever. And anybody that knew that guy's work ethic and drive would never be surprised that one day he was going to be on top. And I feel like a lot of the most successful people I talk to, it's never a shock, because whatever they're doing, whether it's working at McDonald's, on the jiu-jitsu mats, or in business, they're always bringing their A game. And that's how they got the opportunities, because people recognize that in them. And then they go to the next thing and the next thing. So, you know, the people that just want to hit record and record a podcast, or just show up at jiu-jitsu and then be a UFC champion, it's like you said, there's a low barrier to entry, but to stick around, the attrition rate is crazy, because people see it gets tough, or it's a lot harder than just posting a Lamborghini on Instagram and getting 1,000 subscribers, and they don't want to put the work in. So they go for the next get rich quick scheme, or the diet pill that they don't actually have to work out on. I don't know what it is about human nature that people look for that, but I think that there's something to be said for the character you earn when you go through the process of getting your black belt in anything, regardless if it's martial arts or jiu-jitsu or life.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, it's you know, I think for a long time everybody looked for like the quick solution, like the tip, tricks, and hacks in life. But like, there's no substitute for just like being passionate about something. And that's something that I even struggled with for a while, is like, what the hell was I passionate about? Because I loved crypto, I loved jiu-jitsu, I liked MMA, I liked broadcast. And, you know, I have 4 kids. So it's like that also is a huge commitment in terms of time. And like there's definitely a sacrifice that comes from like, right now I'm talking to you and I'm not with my family. Right. So, but that's fine. You know, I make these decisions, but there's always like that, you know, that thing that comes at a cost. And you just really have to figure out what at the end of the day you're passionate about. And I think that's probably the biggest issue, is that people, you know, we're conditioned, right? Like we go to school to get a good job, to go to college, to get a good job. And, you know, I'm going to talk about my wife for a second. I think she's okay with this. She was always told from a young age, you should be an attorney. You should be an attorney. Brilliant woman, beautiful woman, love her to death. But goes to, you know, school, goes to law school, is an attorney, and just fucking hates her job now. Just hates the stress. That it's depressing. She's got $370,000 in law school debt, and she's a great fucking attorney. Like has won all these awards and stuff, but like happiness factor is so key. You know, like and I think that's the people we chase the idea of money, but it's really time. Time is the irreplaceable commodity. You can always make more money. You know, fuck. Look at the government. I think it's like 80% of the dollars printed were in the last 24 months. It's fucking insane in circulation. You can always make more money. It's the time that we don't really have, and that's really what at the end of the day, like even myself, I find myself chasing. Okay, well I got to here financially. I want to get to here, and then the next thing will be this. And like, how many cars is enough? How big of a house do you need? At the end of the day, like it's about. Like, I'm not going to be on my deathbed and look back and be like, oh, remember, like, I have all these things. I want to look back and think about all the great memories I had. And I think that spending time investing in those things is infinitely more important, and finding that thing you're passionate about is the way to make that come to fruition.
I agree, man. I think the fulfillment factor versus the achievement factor is something that people don't understand as much. And I think you just hit it on the head. And it transitions really well, because when I heard you talking about the new movie Ask Me to Dance that you have coming out, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I remember you saying that the good choices you've made on the investment side have allowed you to now go chase your passions, and it kind of freed up that time to go, you know what, let me go look into acting again. And I'm always big on that of, you know, real estate, you know, it's a big part of me and my business, and maybe real estate's not the thing, maybe crypto's not the thing, but it is a great way that's known across the board now that you can achieve something and then go chase what you want for your fulfillment side of it. Because I mean, if you're behind a desk or in a cubicle for, you know, 40, 50, 60 hours a week, you burn out. It gets very hard to go chase your dreams. But I feel like doing the things we've done and making the sacrifices to learn and invest and take some of those calculated risks really opens up that whole window of being able to find the things in life that really get you going.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, I think that like the way that Ask Me to Dance came about was I have a dear friend of mine, Tom Malloy, who has produced a bunch of movies. He literally wrote the book. He was one of my first podcast guests. He literally wrote the book on independent film financing called Bankroll. And he's raised millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars for independent films and produced and stuff. And he's a very funny guy. And he wrote this comedy, and it was he's written other movies too, but this is the first one he like wrote the comedy. This was his first time directing and wanted to produce it. And then on the other side, I had met Charlie Shrem and just become friends with Charlie. And through the course of that dialogue, I had realized Charlie's wife was an aspiring actress, and he said, oh man, if there's ever an opportunity to invest in a film for her, you know, I'd totally be down for that. So I just kind of, you know, like was the middleman there to put those two guys together. And then as part of that, like it helped me leverage those relationships. And I think it creates like a win-win-win scenario. You know, I think that's like, you can, you know, you can you can shear a sheep many times. You can only skin it once. I think that like a lot of people go in and they try to like get as much as they can. But I think like if you can approach it and everybody wins, right? Like Tom wins, I win, Charlie wins, his wife wins. Hopefully Charlie wins and makes money back and brought his investors in. But you know, movie business is a fickle business, man. It's a tough biz, and that's probably the easiest business to be just lackadaisical in, because you know, from an audition perspective, like people see all these, you know, people, it's so sexy to see like, you know, the Halle Berrys or the, you know, the, what's the guy that plays Thor? Oh, fuck. Chris Hemsworth on TV. Yeah, the Chris Hemsworth on TV, and we see like the lifestyle, and you know, we don't have royalty in this country. So the rock stars, the movie stars, they're our royalty. They're the ones that the kids look up to as, oh, you know, the sports athletes. But like a lot of times they're chasing the end mean, right? And like that's kind of the thing too that I have slowly come to understand about myself, is that like I think I was never necessarily passionate about acting. I think I was more passionate about like what the acting meant, which would be like, hey, like I got picked on in grammar school, so like I always wanted to be accepted by people and like be liked. So I felt like, oh, that was a conduit to an end. And I think that I realized I was doing myself a disservice, because like I wasn't actually like, if you want to be a writer, you got to go fucking write. Being an actor, like I was never like, let me just do a bunch of acting. Like I always was diligent because I was you know, like a martial artist. Like I was always in classes and I was doing my work. But in terms of taking the extra 10% of doing more things and the things that are needed to be successful in that space, truly successful, outside of just waiting for the audition, putting in your work, and it's discouraging. You know, you go on fucking 400 auditions before you book something. And then you'll end up losing money, because if you pay everybody in the gas, you know, it's horrible. So, yeah, I think that like, you know, that's kind of what full circle has led me to the podcast thing, is that I do like I'm very passionate about talking to people, and I love learning about like business and how people build empires, and like seeing the parallels. And I have an inquisitive mind, I think, by nature, and so that's why I think it's been so far so good.
I love that, man. And a mutual friend of ours, Brian Callen, I love hearing his tale of that too, because he is a guy that's been around that industry for decades and decades and decades. And look at what wound up being the thing that really was the catalyst now was the podcast, which, when he first started it, people were like, podcast, dude, like, what are you doing? You're an idiot. You're not going to do that.
Yeah.
And then look at like where it's been. But, it's the same bumps and bruises that you see like on the mats that you take in business and just stick around, and he reinvents himself and he's out there doing new things. So I respect all that for sure, man. And I think you nailed it with that. And transitioning a little bit from crypto, I haven't heard a lot about your real estate journey, but I know you said you did have some real estate investments and stuff. What are you doing on the real estate side?
We're gonna have to cut all that out because I'm in court on the real estate stuff. So
no worries, man.
So back to the crypto.
Yeah, we'll go right into martial arts.
Yeah, we'll go right into
stuff in that, man.
Yeah, no worries, man.
So transitioning out of that, one of the things that I tried to hold off until the end because I knew I was going to geek out hard on it. But going into just MMA and jiu-jitsu and all this stuff on Human Weapon, man, I love that. I could talk for days. And I loved your interview with Gary Tonin. I had him on mine. And some of these guys that I love the fact that they're coming on podcasts and talking, because I feel like the old cliche that these fighters are just meatheads is so far gone when you hear how deep into like just emotion and self-awareness the guys like the Gary Tonins of the world are. I think it's amazing now, but I'd love to hear, being a guy that's trained under somebody so amazing as Renzo Gracie, and then somebody so innovative as Eddie Bravo. It used to be, kind of something you couldn't do. You couldn't do the 10th Planet thing and the Gracie Jiu-Jitsu thing. So I'd love to hear your take on just MMA and Jiu-Jitsu the way it is today versus when you were coming up in like 1998.
Yeah, so when I first started training, the landscape was a desolate, barren area. I mean, if you envisioned the BJJ community, it was an old Western with the tumbleweed going like there was not a lot of guys around. I remember my first, so the way that I started doing jiu-jitsu was a friend of mine, Sean Terrence, who's one of my best friends. He had learned some jiu-jitsu from a guy who had went to a Hicks and Gracie seminar in like 1994, 93, 94. So he'd come over and we would like put a piece of carpet in our front yard, and he was showing me some like rudimentary arm bars, triangles, very, very basic stuff. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. And it was just very linear, very like solid old school jiu-jitsu. And then from there, I was able to get into a JKD school. So like I have an instructorship in Jeet Kune Do, and so those classes were kind of my first foray into mixed martial arts, because they were 90 minutes. And the first, you'd have like 30 minutes where it was gi jiu-jitsu. Then you'd have 30 minutes of kickboxing, and then there would be like trapping or stick fighting. But for the most part, outside of having like a strong wrestling base, it was it encompassed a lot of areas of attack and range. So that's kind of how I initially got into it. But the main thing is I was at a Renzo Gracie seminar, I think in 1996, and you go to a seminar now and there's no shortage of black belts teaching seminars, and there's dozens of people. And we were in Kankakee, and there was like 2 blue belts, 1 purple belt, who was literally from Brazil, and then 70 white belts. I mean, there was that's how new jiu-jitsu was. I mean, like you'd watch these blue belts roll, and you felt like that was like watching like the Mundials now. You're like, and like looking back, their technique was probably so shitty because, iron sharpens iron. And as there's more eyes on the communal knowledge, the more eyes are on jiu-jitsu, the more people that can innovate jiu-jitsu. And jiu-jitsu is, I think, an outlier in terms of martial arts, because it very much, and you've heard this before, right? It parallels chess. It's like a chess game, and it really is. And I think that at the highest level, some of the guys that are the best jiu-jitsu practitioners are really, really, really intelligent, intelligent guys, because you have to be able to adapt and grow and learn this seemingly just when you think there can't possibly be a different move, because I've been doing this for 30, 25 years. You see something else, and you're like, Jesus, that's freaking insane. And so a lot of the guys, like the Gary Tonins and the high-level guys, John Danaher's, they're really smart guys. Getting into fighting is a weird mix, because now it's I think the first time that people can actually say, all right, this is a viable career path. When I was fighting, I mean, you were making a couple $100 if you were getting paid at all to fight, and I had a contract to fight on the Royce Gracie Matt Hughes card. I finally got like my UFC break. I was supposed to fight Spencer Fisher at UFC 60. So I finally make the break, right? And like the pay back then was 2-2, 4-4, 6-6, 8-8. So like 2,000 a show, 2,000 if you lost, 2,000 if you won. So like even if you fought 3 times a year and you won every one, like quick math, 2, 2, 4, so what's that? 6, 12, 20, it'd be like $24,000 if you won your first 3 fights in the UFC. That's why we'd see these guys. Like I use Rich Franklin as an example. Like he'd come out to defend his middleweight belt, and it would be he's also a school teacher. Like people have the jobs. So I think we're just starting to get to the point now where that becomes a viable career path. And I think because of that's pushing out some of more of the like the meathead tough guys that just wanted to be tough fighters and stuff. And we're seeing guys that you can't just be good in one area anymore to succeed in the UFC. You have to be a great wrestler. You have to be a great striker. You have to be a great jiu-jitsu person. And on top of that, you have to be an athlete. You know, before, I mean, let's call a spade a spade. Royce Gracie is not by any stretch of the imagination a specimen of a man. He was not, when he fought in the UFC, an athletically prowess beyond any, like he wasn't Black Panther by a stretch of imagination, but he was really good at one thing. Ken Shamrock was a freak athlete, and probably had a little help from every other injectable under the sun. But like he was an athletic specimen. So I think that like we saw at that time the evolution of martial arts, which was like, it was very much stylistically, right? Like my style is better than your style. And even nowadays, I roll my eyes when I see like the lower third chyrons of MMA events, and they have like he's a striker, he's a street fighter. I'm like, everyone cross trains now. It's hard to be like pigeonholed into being just a linear martial artist. So, but yeah, the sport's growing. I mean, I think that like the big shift we're seeing, I think, is that we're getting less and less gi action and more no gi action. Now, you've got BJJ fanatics, pumping out videos, and guys are making money, and ADCCs and guys like Gordon Ryan in social media. I just missed the social media curve when Human Weapon was on. It was like 2007, 8, and it wasn't until like 2009 like Twitter really started hitting, and then Instagram a few years later. But it's given everyone a great platform to really market themselves and to grow.
Yeah, man, it breaks my heart sometimes because some of the guys that I, trained with for years, I remember like Pete Drago specifically, the guy had some of the most legendary fights, man. And he was just a little bit too early that you really couldn't make money doing it. But fighting like he fought, if those fights were now, he'd be getting $50,000 to $75,000 performance of the night checks all the time. And his life's totally different.
Yeah.
But people forget that guys like you, guys like Matt Serra, guys like Pete Drago paved the way, taking all those beatings and beating up their body, fighting for nothing on like the local shows to get that shot, and then to still make nothing there. And I think transitioning to Human Weapon is another great example because there's variations that have come from there, but you were really the original as far as I remember. And I feel like if that show was on today, it would probably be the biggest show on TV. It did really well then. I don't want to discourage that at all. But, the thing that was attractive for UFC was everybody wanted to see all the different disciplines, which people don't really only know about the core 4 or 5, but that's what attracted it to them. Whereas your whole show is really based on going out and testing all those. So I feel like nobody really has a better knowledge of what martial arts actually work for a practical fight situation than you. So I'd love to hear, based on your experience there, you got a kid. I get the calls all the time. Hey, my kid wants to get into something. What do you suggest he starts with? What would your answer be?
Mine probably would be wrestling. I think for a multitude of factors. I think that it's easily accessible. It's not something that you have to worry about your 4-year-old getting punched in the face. And I think that wrestling not only teaches drive and work ethic, and if you can take that mentality that a wrestler has that's ingrained in them with the sweat and the working out and the lifting, and then you can like cut your teeth on that's going to play parallels to a bunch of different other martial arts down the road. So I think wrestling would be the first thing. And also just from an academic point of view, I think it's fundamentally the best because you can dictate where a fight happens. You can take someone down, you can stand up, you know how to sprawl, things like that. After that, I would probably say jiu-jitsu, and then third would be boxing from a safety perspective. So, but it really depends. I mean, I think that one of the things that I had the epiphany of when I was doing Human Weapon was that I kind of went with this arrogant attitude that we know what works as a martial art and what doesn't work as a martial art because we've seen the UFCs. Like there's the outliers, a couple of guys like Luazu who did Taekwondo, or GSP, or Lyoto Machida who did karate. But for the most part, everyone's like, all right, you're going to wrestle, you're going to do jiu-jitsu, and you're going to do Muay Thai, right? And you're going to train these 3 disciplines pretty much autonomously of each other, and then also together as an MMA unit. But then you realize, well, that's still just within the parameters of being in a cage with 5-minute rounds and with gloves on, and in the parameters of you can't do X, Y, and Z, and you don't have to worry about knives, protecting your family, getting out of a situation, and things like that. So from a practical point of view, when people ask me, like, what do you think of this martial art? What do you think of that? I'm like, it's always such a loaded question. I had someone message me and ask me about Taekwondo and what do you think about Taekwondo? And it's never a short answer for me, because there's pros and cons to every martial art. And I think it's like dating. You find the fit that's right for you, and sometimes you date something for a few months, and you're like, I thought this was right, and this doesn't fit for me. Or sometimes it fits for that part of your life, and then you go on to something different, and then this is the new thing. As I get older too, like jiu-jitsu, it's you wears and tears on you. Like, I'm starting to feel the joint injuries and stuff like that, and getting wrenched on and stuff like that. But yeah.
I love that, man. It's interesting too, because you talk about the beatings that your body takes over the years. And for anybody listening, you want some interesting advice on crypto and stuff, definitely check out those 2 episodes on your podcast. But also you can go on, and I just bought the whole season of Human Weapon on Apple TV. So hopefully you're getting a cut of that. But
not so much.
Sorry. I'll cut that
not so much. No, yeah.
Surprisingly, out of all the episodes that were on there, it looked like from the, what television had on there, that you guys both took the most damage in the Taekwondo episode, which was not what I would have expected.
I think that the Taekwondo. Oh yeah, the Taekwondo episode. Yes, 100%. I'm thinking Muay Thai. Yeah, absolutely, the Taekwondo episode. And I think that was the episode I was the most worried about, mainly because they're so fast, and everything that they're throwing is a kick at the head. So you only have to be wrong, meaning like you missed blocking it, or you didn't catch it literally or physically or metaphorically. One time, and you're going to see stars, which is, I think, readily apparent. And Bill Duff, 6'4", 6'5", 280-pound guy, big guy, small Korean, Taekwondo master, maybe 135 pounds dripping wet, just boop, right on the dot, and just pancaked Bill. And I was like, now I got to go next. And then mine was really my own. One thing I was telling myself the whole time was hands up, hands up, hands up. I was around cornerman, but my knee, which is to this day, I've tore my ACL and meniscus in my right knee. I tried to do a cool like jumping spin kick to see if that would be fun, and I just came down and just snapped my ACL, and I think I still hold to this day the record for the most curse words dropped on the History Channel at one time. You watch an episode, it's just this beep, and you say beep. Okay, all right, I'm gonna go back beep out there and just beep, this beep. And I was like, oh my god, so that was fun.
It's cool, man. That was a great series and a great episode. It reminds me too, like you probably have a great conversation on your podcast with Ray Longo, because I'll walk into his gym, and he started out as a JKD guy. Like in between the Muay Thai sessions or the jiu-jitsu sessions, he's in there doing night fighting with guys, doing the Cali sticks, like doing all that old stuff. So it's cool to watch like martial artists, not just the guys that are coming through that. Like now you're having people that are coming up as mixed martial artists. So I just think it's a really cool, and I thought it was very interesting and very entertaining. And I appreciate you putting your body and your time, your clock, because I'm sure that was crazy going to all those different places, man. But I enjoy watching it, so thanks for doing that.
Yeah, no, I can't complain. It was fun, man. I get to travel the world on someone else's dime. It's like being you're a kid in a candy store. I mean, I grew up watching the old Delta Force movies and all the Chuck Norris and the Karate Kid movies and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So like I was very inundated with the martial arts culture growing up, right? Like how cool it was, and then to be able to go around the world and study with like literally the best people in every martial art. Were there things that if I produced the show I would have done differently? Absolutely. Or were there things towards the end of the show that I think we could have done better in the beginning? Absolutely. But like, come on, like it was such a great experience. I can't ever really talk shit about it. And Bill and I are dear friends to this day too. We talk every week.
That's awesome, man. Well, you've been very generous with your time, man. I could talk to you all day about podcasting, business, investing, crypto, and definitely about MMA and jiu-jitsu, man. But how do people find you? Talk about where people find your podcast. How do they link up with you? What do you got going on? What's coming up in the future?
Yeah, so I'm terribly easy to find if you just like type in Google my name. And so yeah, the podcast is on YouTube, the Jason Chambers podcast, and that just sounds so asinine because we couldn't think of another name for it. But the Jason Chambers podcast, we release episodes Tuesdays and Thursdays in the crypto, sports, entertainment. Basically, if it's someone that I think is interesting and there's some value there, we're going to talk to them. And then I'm on Instagram all the time, the Jason Chambers. And I finally got that blue check mark, which was so important, man. That was a big win for me, getting that blue check mark. I was like, I have validation by no one.
Awesome, man. Well, I appreciate it, man. I am really enjoying your podcast. I'll put show links to all your social media and obviously to your podcast on here.
Oh, cool.
I highly recommend everybody check it out because you have great guests. You're a great host, and it's just really good, inspiring, and entertaining conversations, man. So, any final thoughts before we let you go today?
I'm just still in a haze about my Bears getting blown out by Green Bay Packers. But otherwise, no, I don't think I have anything. We covered a lot of base, man. Thanks for having me on and taking the time.
I appreciate you coming on, man, and sharing your expertise and your knowledge. It's been a real pleasure for me. Thank you. You bring your A Game podcast, my friend. Have a great day. We look forward to seeing you again, Jason Chambers.
Thanks, Dick. Take it easy.